Tonight on Primetime, energy markets remain on edge tonight. Oil prices have eased slightly, but the bigger concern is supply disruption and rising inflation pressures as tensions around key shipping routes continue to rattle global markets. Prices dip slightly, but the worry isn't gone. A very good evening. Oil prices may be easing for now, but the broader concern hasn't disappeared. Questions remain about supply, inflation, and how markets might react if disruptions continue along the key energy routes that we're seeing all over recent news. Now, G7 countries say that they're ready to respond if necessary as governments and traders watch developments closely and weigh the potential impact on global energy stability.
On Monday, G7 countries said they are prepared to take measures to support energy supplies in response to the sharp rise in global oil prices. However, finance ministers have yet to decide on releasing strategic reserves. French Finance Minister Lescure said there are no supply problems in Europe or the US.
I want to be very clear today. The oil market, and the gas market as well, is being affected by disruptions mainly linked to the fact that oil and gas exports leaving the Middle East are heading to Asia, a region therefore directly impacted by market upheavals.
On Monday, oil prices reached their highest levels since mid-2022. The rise was driven by shipping disruptions and production cuts from some oil-producing countries. A G7 official said there is broad agreement not to release reserves at this stage. The final decision rests with G7 leaders. IEA Executive Director Fatih Birol said the market has worsened in recent days. Transit issues through the Strait of Hormuz and production cuts are creating serious risks. Birol also said he is in regular contact with energy ministers from Saudi Arabia, Brazil, India, Azerbaijan and Singapore. The IEA reports that member countries hold over 1.2 billion barrels of public oil reserves, plus an additional 600 million barrels of industry stocks. The agency was established after the 1970s oil crisis. Member countries are required to keep at least 90 days' worth of oil imports in reserve. In 2022, over 180 million barrels of oil were released collectively. Energy supply problems in the region could raise global prices and inflation. On Monday morning in Asia, Brent crude rose over 25% to $119.50 a barrel. Then fell to about $102. UK gas prices jumped to 171 pence per therm, then dropped to 149 pence. Global stock markets fell, S&P 500 down 0.2%, Dow Jones 0.5%, FTSE 100 0.3%. Shell and BP shares rose 2.4% and 1.9%. Germany's DAX fell 0.8%. France's CAC 40 down 1%, Japan's Nikkei 225 down 5.2%, South Korea's Kospi down 6%. In the UK, interest rates keep rising. 2-year bonds at 4.09%, 10-year at 4.72%.
Well, to help us understand what's really happening in the energy markets and whether this moment is a short-term shock or something more serious, I'm joined now by Dr. John Bolus, an energy and geopolitics analyst and founder of Energy Straits. Dr. Bolus, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. It's good to have you with us. Let's start with what we've seen on the markets today. Prices easing slightly. Anxiety, though, still not gone away. What is it precisely at the moment that markets are particularly worried about?
Well, I think they've reacted based on Trump's announcement that the war is very complete, which it's of course always difficult to parse his words and what they mean. But we do know that Trump generally reacts to markets and doesn't want to see them go down. Markets generally anticipate risk. And because we have not had massive supply disruptions affect the actual physical supply, what markets are reacting to is the fear of that. And so it's very easy to kind of shrug it off if you think the war is very complete. So it kind of all depends on how long we think this assault is going to last.
It's a very interesting point you make there, because of course we've seen things recently that we haven't seen before, or at least in a very long time, haven't we? We've heard reports of hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 tankers loaded with oil just sitting there doing nothing, unable to get to their destination. How does a problem like that actually get resolved? What can be done to actually make sure that these corridors, these essential routes are kept open?
They are quite essential, and there's none more essential than the Strait of Hormuz. The obvious answer is to have complete security in the strait, and how that can be provided to calm insurance markets, to calm suppliers who are now having to shut in production in the Gulf and are unable to lift more product and move it. Of course, oil is basically worthless unless it can reach its final consumer. So protecting the strait is of utmost importance. And if, after this war, you will assume that the strait could be further protected because it does not face necessarily, it will face at least a more degraded threat from Iran to close it. However, it is not in Iran's interest to close it. It's not in China's interest. It's not really in anybody's interest to close it. So, hopefully calmer heads will prevail and the security will be reestablished, again, dependent on when the war stops.
And we've heard from the G7 that they're prepared to step in if markets do become too unstable. What is too unstable, and precisely what is it that they could do? What do they mean by stepping in, do you think?
Yeah, too unstable is difficult to parse. That can mean a lot of things. We're certainly not there yet. Europe is perhaps the most at risk of supply disruptions and skyrocketing prices. Of course, we've seen oil come down again today. They can certainly put diplomatic pressure to end the war. I would assume we've kind of been reading reports that they've been doing that. I don't think they supported this war from the beginning. So there's kind of the behind the scenes work that can be done there. But most strategically, they have petroleum reserves that they can release. The IEA mandates, this is after the 1973-74 oil crisis, they mandated that countries keep 90 days of net import stocks on hand. We're only 1 week into this, threat to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz, so they can release those stocks, not all at once. It can't be just a flood onto the market. Those are government mandated stocks. You also have maybe 3 times as many within oil companies themselves or in companies. So there's a lot of buffer in play. China is not an IEA member, but they've been stockpiling oil for quite some time. And so I think this is happening at a time when, unlike, let's say, in 2021 and 2022, where we already had a tight gas market, and then the Russian-Ukraine war happened, that really sent things into a spiral of a tight market. This circumstance is not a particularly tight oil market, and as I said, China has been preparing for this scenario. It's essential to its energy security that it protects that. So,
well, that's a message that potentially some economists will find reassuring, I think, John. I mean, there has been a lot of talk about higher energy prices pushing up inflation, the need then for governments to adjust economic policy. Are we perhaps worrying a bit too much about this?
If you can't tell, that's kind of where I land. I think that said, of course, spiraling high oil prices are a huge threat to inflation. Oil costs make transport costs go up, food costs, of course, electricity and energy costs, all throughout the supply chain and the economy. So it's a direct correlation with inflation, and they should be concerned about it. However, it's my feeling that, given this wider range, the buffers in the market, we've seen supply shocks before, and we have much more flexible means to handle them. So, it's not time to totally panic at this moment.
Okay, and when you sort of take that step back, then in your mind, by your analysis, this is more of a short-term shock. We're seeing the ripple effects of volatility, but it doesn't present the beginnings of some sort of global economic calamity.
No, let's calm down. That's my opinion. It has the potential to, if supply is offline for months on end, then yes, stocks start getting depleted, and we have real problems. But we're just so far away from that at this point.
Dr. Bolus, thank you. Nice to get a reassuring message there at the end. We appreciate your analysis very much indeed. Thank you for joining us on Primetime.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, from energy markets now to the conflict shaping them. US President Donald Trump says the military campaign against Iran is already delivering major results, claiming Tehran's missile and drone capabilities have been significantly weakened. But while suggesting the conflict could end relatively soon, the president also made it clear that operations will continue until Iran is no longer able to threaten the United States or its allies.
US President Donald Trump says the war against Iran could end soon, but warned that military operations will continue until the enemy is totally and decisively defeated. Speaking in Florida, Trump described the campaign as a short-term excursion, claiming US and Israeli forces have already destroyed much of Iran's military infrastructure.
We continue to target Iran's drone and missile capabilities. Their drones are way down. Their drone manufacturing has been hit.
Trump also stressed that Washington's goal is to ensure Iran cannot develop weapons that could threaten the United States, Israel, or their allies for a long time. Meanwhile, Israel says it has continued carrying out waves of airstrikes across Iran, targeting military command centers, missile production facilities, and other infrastructure linked to the Iranian military. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi described the conflict as a war imposed on Iran, insisting the country's actions are acts of self-defense. He also said Iran is unlikely to resume negotiations with Washington after what he called a bitter experience with past talks. The conflict escalated further after Mojtaba Khamenei was appointed Iran's new supreme leader following the death of his father, Ali Khamenei, in earlier US-Israeli strikes. With the fighting now entering its second week, tensions remain high across the region, raising concerns the conflict could widen further.
Okay, for more now on the situation and what it could mean for the wider region, I'm joined by Nikolai Gunderson, a Middle East analyst. Nikolai, very good to see you. Thank you very much for joining us on Primetime. Okay, let's start with this Washington claim then. President Trump says he significantly weakened not just Iran's missile capability, but their drone capabilities too. Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
It is partly true that Iran has been worn down, been partly worn down. But I think also what we've seen in the war so far is Iran has changed tactic, now more focused on trying to outlast US and Israeli strikes. So we've seen a higher use of drones because they are of a lower cost. We've seen sparing use of advanced missiles as well. We've also seen that after the death of Khamenei, and before, from June 2025, was a focus on allowing military units to have their own decision-making authority when it comes to airstrikes, because they understood that if the central leadership is paralyzed, they have to continue being fight. So we are actually seeing that while there is some truth to Trump's claims, I don't feel that Iran is on the verge of surrender. And I think that they're really going to dig in and try to outlast these strikes themselves.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And just on the timings of things, again, we've heard more announcements. We've heard statements like, the war will be over soon. We're way ahead of schedule. But we've also seen some kind of cautionary notes as well. How should we interpret the messaging about the timing, do you think?
I think there's a lot of mixed messages here. I mean, as you just mentioned, the idea of being ahead of schedule, okay, fine, but why is the deadline given to people? I think at this stage, Trump and perhaps the U.S. Government are trying to reassure allies, Americans as well, and the energy markets. Things are going to be okay. But I think that at the end of the day, they don't have a fixed timeline because they don't know how Iran is thinking. My question becomes, this war end without Iran agreeing that it's going to end? And I think that the answer to that is really no. Iran is not willing to talk to the United States at this stage. As mentioned by there's a sense of betrayal now, having dealt with the Americans and seeing that during negotiations, Trump was willing to start airstrikes and as well. So I think that really what we're seeing is that Trump wants to bring this war to an end. He may actually do so in the next couple of weeks, if possible, should he feel he's been able to damage Iran's military capabilities. But I think that Iran itself, they still have a certain number of missiles, and they will still be very strategic with how they use those missiles because they don't want to give in to the United States.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, from Tehran's perspective then, how do they see this? What options have the Iranians got? They've got a new leader. In some sense, they've got some increased sort of popularity. The regime, we've seen people, pro-government supporters out in the streets. What are they thinking? What options do they have at this point?
I think there's a lot of focus on diplomacy. I mean, let's not forget that we were seeing in Iran, there were protests in December 2025 spreading, and then now suddenly we've gone from people protesting against the regime to people saying, why is Trump attacking our country? So we have a rallying cry that the regime used. It's very interesting as well that the successor is the son of the previous leader. That tells me that Iran wants to emphasize continuity. They're not interested in having a reformer right now. They're interested in having someone who can continue that legacy and continue also standing up to the United States. I think that from Tehran's perspective, they need to again outlast the United States, outlast Israel, and outlast the strikes. One of the issues that they have is that when the strikes happened, Iran made the decision to attack Gulf allies in the region and attack U.S. assets in the Gulf. This is very different than focusing only on Israel. Had focused on attacking only Israel, perhaps the Gulf states would have seen things differently. But I think that because they focused on attacking the Gulf, there is the risk that the Gulf and the U.S. with Israel. At the same time, I think Iran wants to say, look, the Gulf is only stable if we say that it's stable. If we decide to attack, we can attack quality, shipping, aviation, tourism, and investment, and we have seen that happen.
Yeah, it's very interesting indeed. You're talking about the Gulf states there. I mean, in terms of the risk of even more regional sort of contagion, if you like, for this conflict. I mean, what happens here? Let's say the US stop bombing Iran, claim a gigantic victory. Tehran disagrees, but nevertheless, that's the position in Washington. Does Tehran continue to bomb the Gulf countries, or does it sort of sit back and do some more strategic planning?
I think that from an answer, they might say, well, if the United States stops bombing us, and that includes not using Gulf air bases anymore, so not using U.S. assets gases, then Iran would probably also stop bombing and stop, launching its own missiles. However, the bigger question for me becomes, to what extent is the Gulf still seen as stable? We have had now 2 or 3 incidents. The June 2025 strikes which had a Gulf spillover. We also saw 2017 that the Gulf state of Qatar was blockaded, and that challenged the image of the Gulf being stable. So we've had now at least 3 incidents where this image of the Gulf being the only stable part of this is seen as perhaps a mirage. And I think that if the war were to end tomorrow, my question is, how long will it take to build back that stability, perceived or otherwise?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And finally, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot somewhat here, but what's your instinct in terms of how this war will come to a conclusion? Are you sensing that actually Washington is quite likely to declare victory sooner than perhaps people expected? If so, what do you expect the messaging from Tehran to be? Just give us your kind of predictions, if you will.
I think here we have issues. So firstly, I don't know if Trump realized to what extent Iran would not back down. He does have advisors, so hopefully he would have realized that. But at the same time, for Trump, the important thing is the image of victory. If Trump can declare that they have eroded Iran's military capability, then we might find that that's enough. Let's not forget that Trump himself is dealing with midterms coming up in November. He's also dealing with the energy markets and how that would impact the average American consumer at the petrol pump as well. That's another thing that he might be worried about. I think for Israel as well, let's not forget that the question becomes, do Trump and Netanyahu have the exact same objectives? I think that Israel is more concerned with containing Iran and is more willing to get aggressive, although they will do so with U.S. approval. So at the end of the day, I think that Trump has the final say on whether the strikes will stop. He is able to announce the end of the war. Maybe in a week or 2 he would do that if he feels that he's able to present victory. But for Iran, their image of victory is really the ability to survive. If the regime can present to its people that, we had an American attack unprovoked, Trump damaged negotiations with us by launching these strikes, but we survived, that for them would be a victory.
Good to have you with us, Nikolai. Thank you very much indeed for that analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Do stay tuned.
The global defense industry plays a vital role in ensuring national security. In Turkey, companies in this sector strengthen domestic production and enhance military independence.
ISA-based radar, Murat radar. This is fully digital radar. This is new for world. Aselsan today, Turkish technology leader and global technology provider.
Yaptığınız atışa hazır. 3, 2, 1, ateş. Hedef imha edildi.
I'm Nuray Mustafa. This is One on One.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Now, Andy Mioch is with us with the very latest business news stories. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, guys, as you might imagine, it's the oil prices tumbling as the global shares rallied after the U.S. president said that the war with Iran could end, quote, very soon. We'll be taking a closer look at the implications of the latest news surrounding the conflict on the future of global oil markets. And there's also a few stories on the auto industry and the toy industry. So let's have a look. First up, oil prices fell sharply after U.S. President Donald Trump said he thought the war in Iran is, quote, very complete, pretty much. Crude had reached almost $120 a barrel on Monday over fears that the conflict would cause lengthy disruption to energy supplies from the Middle East, but dropped back to around $90 following Trump's comments.
Brent crude fell below $93 per barrel by 11 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on Tuesday, after surging to nearly $120 in the previous session, as U.S. President Donald Trump signaled that the war with Iran may be nearing its end, and that the U.S. military operation is progressing well ahead of its initial timetable. Trump also said he plans to waive oil-related sanctions and have the U.S. Navy escort tankers through the Strait of Hormuz in an effort to keep oil prices in check. Wall Street stocks clawed their way back from a steep sell-off to close higher on Monday, notching a final hour rebound following Trump's remarks. All three indexes staged a late comeback, with the Dow ending 0.5% higher. The S&P 500 gained more than 0.8%, while the Nasdaq rose almost 1.4%. On Tuesday, Iran's Revolutionary Guard said they would not allow 1 litre of oil to be shipped from the Middle East if US and Israeli attacks continue, prompting a warning from Donald Trump that the US would hit Iran much harder if it blocked exports from the vital energy-producing region. The war has effectively halted shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, where a fifth of global oil and liquefied natural gas normally passes along Iran's coast, and producers have run out of storage and stopped pumping. The chief executive of Saudi Arabia's state oil giant Aramco said there could be catastrophic consequences for the world's oil markets the longer the disruption from the closure of the strait goes on.
Well, joining me now to discuss the implications of this is energy security specialist John Roberts. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, oil prices have plunged following Trump's remarks, but they remain elevated. The G7 energy ministers today stopped short of deciding to release those strategic oil reserves. Was that something you were expecting?
No. I think we're in a highly volatile situation. We can assume we're going to be in a range of relatively high prices for some time to come. But the key word I use is range. We really do not know exactly how price formation will be structured for the next several months. And there's a reason for that. One is the unpredictability of the President of the United States. The other is we do not know what kind of reaction there will be from Iran after President Trump declares, whenever he does so, his victory. And he may, as it were, order the guns to be silent on his side. But does that mean that Iran will immediately stop its efforts to interdict shipping oil tankers and LNG tankers through the Strait of Hormuz? We just don't know.
And last night we've heard something else from President Trump. He had said that the U.S. government will waive certain oil sanctions. Now, in this situation with those waivers, who stands to gain the most, and how much can those waivers make a dent in the price of crude?
They certainly can have a modest impact on the dent. Essentially, what it really means is that the US will continue to turn a blind eye to Russian sales of oil to India, which have been going ahead despite Indian promises that they would observe some kind of sanctions imposed by the United States against Russia. In practice, what does it mean to the oil market? Not that much if Russia is not also in a position to sell oil to Western Europe beyond the limited amounts that go out already. I tend to think that this is a distraction in the oil market sense. What it is not a distraction of is in terms of the impact on the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Now, these Gulf producers, most of them, have cut output because of the disruptions to the Strait of Hormuz, that vital export route from the Middle East. We've heard today from Saudi Aramco's CEO warning that if the disruption goes on, the consequences would be catastrophic. What's the worst scenario here? What can happen?
The worst that can happen is pretty awful, and that is that Iran, for one reason or another, and this can include provocation from the United States, decides that it really will keep the straits closed. When you think how tiny it is and how much oil and how much LNG comes through, 90.5% of the world's LNG gets produced and exported by Qatar, to which you can also add a small amount of LNG that gets, considerable amount of LNG, that gets produced by Abu Dhabi as well. All of that comes out through the strait. And there is no other way to get that gas to market. With oil, it's not quite so clear-cut. The Saudis, for example, have their east-west pipeline. They could probably get about half of their regular production to go out via Yanbu rather than Jubail. But it still leaves problems for other oil exporters in the region, and it still has an impact on the oil price. As for tanker being protected by US ships and covered by US insurance, this is not the same as the tanker war of the 1980s. In those days, it wasn't Iran so much threatening the tankers as Iraq, and the distance was much more considerable. So therefore, it was easier to organize a tanker protection system. What's more, the tanker system that they had in the 1980s had much broader international support. Support for the US and Israel in this war is strictly limited, and I don't really know whether countries like Britain and Canada, which played major roles in the protection in the 1980s, are really willing to do the same this time around.
Quite a lot of moving pieces, John. Thank you so much for joining us and providing us with your analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Now, as the bulk of Monday's historic surge in crude oil prices was reversed, Asian and European share prices staged a recovery. This comes as a response to a combination of easing investor fears.
In 3, 2, 1.
Kenya Pipeline Company's shares edged slightly higher in early Tuesday trade after debuting on the Nairobi.
European shares bounced back on Tuesday as investor sentiment was lifted after US President Donald Trump said the war in the Middle East could come to a quick end. The pan-European benchmark added 1.9% to 606 points as of 8:08 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, after closing at its weakest level in more than 2 months. Financial stocks were the biggest boost to the benchmark index, with the sector jumping 3.7%. Energy stocks fell 1.2% on the tumbling oil prices. Over in Asia, stocks rallied at the start of trading on Tuesday. Japan's benchmark Nikkei index climbed 1.5% to 53,524 points at opening, recouping some losses after a 5.2% plunge the day before. In South Korea, the benchmark Kospi index opened up 271 points, or 5.1%, at 5,523 points. Hong Kong's benchmark Hang Seng Index rose 1.3% at opening, while the Shanghai Composite Index was up 0.05%. Taiwan stocks surged, hitting an intraday high of 33,199 points, jumping more than 1,000 points to reclaim the 33,000 point level on Tuesday.
Over in Africa, Kenya pipeline companies' shares traded marginally higher in early trade on Tuesday after listing on the Nairobi Stock Exchange. The Kenyan government sold a 65% stake in the pipeline company, raising some $820 million in the country's first major IPO in nearly 2 decades.
In 3, 2, 1.
Kenya Pipeline Company's shares edged slightly higher in early Tuesday trade after debuting on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, changing hands at 9.4 shillings compared to the IPO price of 9 shillings. The government raised 106.3 billion shillings, or $823 million, from selling a 65% stake in its first major initial public offering in nearly 20 years, which was oversubscribed despite valuation concerns and reports of investor apathy. President William Ruto, who rang the opening bell, said proceeds would go to the new National Infrastructure Fund and help expand Nairobi's main airport, arguing privatization was essential to avoid slowing investment or increasing borrowing.
On to the auto industry, Volkswagen reported a more than 50% drop in annual operating profit, citing the impact of U.S. tariffs, currency effects, and a strategic shift at Porsche. The results come as Europe's automakers struggle to get to grips with a series of industry challenges.
Volkswagen is in for another tough year dominated by tariffs and the battle to win back China. It comes after Europe's largest carmaker reported a slump in operating profit on Tuesday and forecast only a modest recovery for its dwindling margin. Like its rivals, Volkswagen has contended with pressures across major markets, with US tariffs costing the firm billions and local competition eroding its share in China, which is the world's biggest car market. The German auto group, whose subsidiaries Porsche and Audi have come under strain, expects an operating margin of between 4% and 5.5% this year. The carmaker's operating profit more than halved in last year to $10.4 billion, missing forecasts. It was dragged down by tariffs and a costly strategic shift at Porsche. Porsche paused its transition to electric last year amid weak demand. The Volkswagen Group plans to make around 50,000 job cuts by 2030 in Germany. This includes a restructuring package at Porsche, whose operating profit disappeared almost entirely last year.
Still with cars, French producer Renault said it aims to end selling simple internal combustion engine vehicles in Europe by 2030 and plans to develop its new electric car platform with Google.
Renault has announced it will end the sale of fuel-only cars in Europe and develop a new electric car platform with Google. The French company said it was forging ahead with the end of the internal combustion engine. The company said that by 2030, the brand is aiming for 100% electric sales in Europe and 50% outside Europe, adding that the transition would also include its budget brand Dacia. The EV sales will include hybrid cars, which are allowed under concessions made by the EU earlier this year to help car companies reach net zero targets and develop small cars in their EV ranges. The company said it plans to develop its new electric car platform together with Google based on Android technology. Renault said the aim is to have 90% of the vehicle functions able to be updated remotely, cutting time to deploy updates and able to handle ultra-fast charging in as little as 10 minutes.
And finally, Lego is bracing for higher energy and raw material costs amid the Middle East conflict, as the Danish toy maker looks to spur growth with interactive smart bricks and Pokemon tie-ups.
Lego is bracing for higher energy and raw material costs as oil and gas prices rise amid conflict in the Middle East. Its chief executive said the Danish toy maker is looking to spur growth with interactive smart bricks and Pokemon tie-ups. The company said rising oil prices could feed through to the cost of plastics and other inputs over time, although existing deals it has meant the effect is likely to be gradual and cushioned. It's not just energy costs. Lego is also navigating tariff volatility. That's after the Supreme Court knocked down some of US President Donald Trump's key levies last month. Trump then imposed a new blanket 10% rate that could rise to 15%. Lego's strategy of having production plants close to key markets has helped rein in costs. It will open its first manufacturing plant in the United States in 2027 in Virginia. Despite the pressures, family-owned Lego reported growth across all regions and product categories last year. The company expects high single-digit revenue growth this year.
Well, that is all in the business brief for tonight. And to get back to you, Guy.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. Very interesting stuff. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Turkey strengthening air defences after missiles entered its airspace amid rising regional tensions. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note. To Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November. Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port Ainu.
Welcome back to PrimeTime. Now, Turkey says it's strengthening its air defense capabilities and coordinating closely with NATO allies after ballistic missiles entered Turkish airspace in recent days. Well, the developments come amid rising regional tensions. A News Istanbul correspondent Adam Morrow has the details.
In a statement released Tuesday, the Turkish Defense Ministry announced that Turkey was in close consultation with its NATO allies to enhance the country's air defense capabilities. According to the ministry, these measures include the deployment of a Patriot air defense system that is currently being prepared for operational readiness in Turkey's east-central Malatya region. The announcement came amid heightened tensions after a second ballistic missile linked to the ongoing regional conflict entered Turkish airspace on Monday. Turkish officials say NATO air defense units intercepted 2 such missiles within the past week. The incidents prompted Turkey's foreign ministry to summon Iran's ambassador in Ankara to formally protest the alleged missile launches. Iranian authorities, however, have denied that their forces targeted Turkish territory. In a phone call Monday, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian that violations of Turkish airspace could not be justified under any circumstances. Erdogan warned that missile strikes affecting neighboring countries would benefit no one and only risked widening the conflict. He also stressed that Ankara opposed what he described as unlawful interventions against Iran and continued to pursue diplomatic efforts aimed at ending the crisis. Pezeshkian, for his part, told his Turkish counterpart that Tehran would launch an investigation into allegations that Iranian missiles had entered Turkish airspace. According to Iranian officials, Pezeshkian also accused Israel and the United States of attempting to create tensions between Iran and its neighbors, including Turkey. On the same day, Erdogan also spoke by phone with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. Aliyev condemned Monday's reported missile attack targeting Turkey and expressed solidarity with what he described as the brotherly Turkish people. Erdogan thanked the Azerbaijani leader for the call and for Baku's continued support. Officials say Ankara will continue coordinating closely with its NATO allies while monitoring developments in the region. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Okay, for more on Turkey's response and what this could mean for the wider region, I'm joined now by Onur Guzaltan, a political scientist. Onur, very good indeed to have you with us on the show. Thanks for joining us. Okay, let's start with the past few days then. Missiles in Turkish airspace, Turkey bolstering their air defences. I mean, it all sounds pretty worrying. How serious is this, do you think? How seriously is it being taken in Turkey?
First of all, I have to say that it's a bloody and illegitimate war against Iran. That these attacks by Israel and United States are completely illegitimate. If you turn back to your question about these missiles on Turkish soil, I think that these are the provocations from the American and the Israeli sides to push Turkey into this war.
So you think the missiles were not Iranian at all? You think they were US or Israeli missiles?
Even after the first missile attack, the British officials they made a statement that these are not the missiles from Iran. So it's not me, but even the officials, they are saying that even the Iranian side, they made several declarations that these are not Iranian missiles. So I think that it's a provocation against Turkey, and the ones who are making these provocations, they want to push Turkey into this bloody and illegitimate war.
So your analysis is that when we saw Mr. Erdogan giving his strong statements, that really Turkey is annoyed with the US and Israel because it believes that they fired the missiles. I mean, that's an extraordinary claim, but it's very interesting if that is what you're saying.
If you read the statement of President Erdogan, you will see that he said that all countries in the region have to be aware of possible Zionist provocations. And he means that Israel want to make this kind of provocations to push the countries of region, like between Turkey and Iran, between Azerbaijan and Iran. Mm-hmm. So I think that all these attacks, missile attacks, are open provocations from the American and Israeli side, because now they are losing this war. So they want to create a more large front against Iran.
So Iranian missile stocks will be fully replete then, because I guess by your analysis, they haven't actually fired any yet.
Personally, I don't have any information about the Iranian missile stocks, but what I see from what we are witnessing in Iran, in Israel, in Strait of Hormuz, that after the 10th day of this war, It was yesterday, I think, that President Trump also he declared that that we are close to the end of the war, and the vice former minister of Iran he openly stated that some countries are looking for mediation between United States and Iran. I think American side want to stop this war now, and the question why now? Because if they are winning this war, why they want to stop it?
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question to ask. I mean, let's talk about NATO, because that's a very interesting dynamic. NATO allies coordinating closely with Ankara. What kind of support, coordination do you think that they might actually bring?
When there was a coup attempt in Turkey in 15th of July, the NATO officials, they didn't make any statements. But when we are talking about this so-called Iranian attacks against Turkey, NATO Secretary General, he made a statement directly. I mean, I think NATO also, now they are pushing their Patriot missiles to next to the Incirlik and the Küreci bases in Turkey. But I think that the ones who are governing NATO also want to push Turkey to join this war. They are also part of this
the conspiracy almost.
Conspiracy from the American and Israeli sides. Because Turkey, for example, let me give you one example. For 30 years, Turkey, more than 30 years, 40 years, Turkey, we are fighting against these terrorist groups, PKK, YPG, PYD. And NATO secretary, all the officials of NATO, where they were when we were fighting against these terrorist groups, for example. But now, when it is against Iran, when it's a kind of a regional possibility of regional conflicts, all these officials, they make statements without waiting any official proof.
It's very interesting. So just to recap, so Iran didn't fire the missile into Turkey's airspace. That was US and Israeli missiles. NATO is pushing Turkey into war. I mean, presumably the drones that have been attacking the Gulf states, I mean, was that sort of secretly the US and Israel too, or did Iran actually fire those?
I don't know. I think that you also read from news that there are several Gulf officials. They made statement that some of these drones, which targeted the civil areas, are not from the Iranian side. That I read these kind of statements several times in the media.
Okay.
And Iran also declared that they targeted American bases on the Gulf countries, but the attacks to the civil areas, that's what the Iranian officials say, and some of the Gulf officials also, they repeat it, is not originate from Iran.
Okay. So the Iranian attacks were only on the non-civilian targets. Anything that's caused controversy was done by a sort of nefarious, mysterious other actor.
But it's logic, right? Because there are American bases in the Gulf.
Well, it's a type of logic. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's an impartial analysis, but it's certainly a type of logic. Okay, let's talk about President Erdogan. He's warned that these violations of Turkish airspace can't be justified under any circumstances. I mean, that's a strong message from a strong leader. What do you think, his overall message to the region right now in relation to this conflict?
Turkey is a sovereign country. Turkey will defend his territory, his national unity. Turkey will continue to follow this balanced policy between West and East, and Turkey will be not part of any war organized by United States and Israel against our regional allies like Iran, or I don't know, against Russia, for example. because these are our neighbors. So there is no reason that Turkey take part in this kind of illegitimate war. So I think that's what President Erdogan want to say.
Okay, and finally, Onur, what's your sense about the risks of this conflict reigniting, spilling over into other countries? How concerned should Turkey be about the possibility of a slight miscalculation causing something very, very unpleasant?
Turkey have dialogue channels with his neighbors. With Iran, for more than 3 centuries, we have the same borders. I mean, that there is diplomatic contact between Turkey and Iran, and I think it will continue. And we have, like in the region, that Turkey, Iran, these are the states which have state tradition. And for really thousands of years, we exist in this region. And I think that the brotherhood between Turkey and Iran will continue. And ensure that Turkey will defend its territory. President Erdogan's statement, I am completely agree with this statement. But I will repeat myself, but I have to say it. But Turkey, I think that Turkey will not take part in this illegitimate and bloody war against Iran, which is organized by United States and Israel.
Onur, we thank you for your views, for your analysis. We appreciate you very much indeed. Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Europe reinforcing naval deployments in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea to protect shipping routes as tensions linked to Iran continue to rise. Do stay with us.
Before partition, Pakistanis were singled out, attacked, and forced from their homes.
More than 200,000 Muslims were eliminated through massacres, through displacement.
In all Indian states, the communities are being oppressed, and the Indian Army is committing atrocities against them.
I left Indian-occupied Kashmir and came to Azad Kashmir on foot.
We cannot even go to the graves of our loved ones. We cannot even pray for them.
What is the fault of the Kashmiri people?
Kashmir is the place where partition never ended.
The region of Kashmir is between 3 nuclear powers.
If a nuclear war breaks out here, not only the South Asia, but the entire world will be affected.
If India believes that people of Jammu and Kashmir are with them, let them go for their referendum tomorrow.
For a Kashmiri, what matters the most is Azadi, is the right of self-determination. Azadi from Indian hegemony.
Warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Now, Europe is boosting its military presence across the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea as tensions linked to Iran continue to rise. France is sending additional warships to support maritime protection missions, while allies including Greece and the Netherlands are reinforcing regional defences to safeguard trade routes and European territory. A News' Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, with France expanding its military footprint across the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea. This as Europe responds to rising tensions linked to Iran. President Emmanuel Macron, speaking during a visit to Cyprus, announced that France will send a second warship to the Red Sea to reinforce the EU's maritime protection mission, Aspidus. The vessels will help escort commercial shipping through waters increasingly threatened by attacks from Iran-aligned Houthi militants. The deployment is part of a broader French buildup across the region. Macron says nearly 12 French naval vessels, including an aircraft carrier strike group and helicopter carriers, are being positioned across the eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and potentially the Strait of Hormuz to safeguard trade routes and deter escalation. This all follows what officials say was the first drone strike linked to the Iran conflict on European territory. Last week, an Iranian-made Shahed drone hit a British military base on Cyprus, prompting European allies to reinforce defenses. Standing alongside the president of Cyprus and the Greek prime minister, Macron declared that an attack on the island is effectively an attack on Europe. France has already sent a frigate and air defense systems to help protect the island, while Greece deployed fighter jets and additional naval patrols. The moves underscore growing concern that the Middle East conflict could spill into European security and disrupt some of the world's most important energy and shipping routes. And that's why the Netherlands also said it would send the air defense and control frigate Evertsen to the eastern Mediterranean, specifically as part of the carrier strike group led by the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle. For Paris and its European partners, the signal is unmistakable. Europe is no longer just watching the crisis from afar. It's positioning naval power across the region to defend its territory, its allies, and the global trade routes that keep its economy moving. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Okay, to help us understand what this means, A News' Katie Wilson has joined us. Katie, before we get into this, I believe there's a breaking news update you want to give us.
Yeah, so in the past few minutes, the British warship HMS Dragon has just left Portsmouth and it's heading to Cyprus. The UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer confirmed a week ago that the Type 45 destroyer would be deployed to the Mediterranean region after a drone struck the runway at the RAF Akrotiri base in Cyprus, causing what the Ministry of Defence described as minimal damage. Now, the Royal Navy has no major warship in the Mediterranean region, and what we know so far is that the ship has been loaded with ammunition and supplies ready to protect a UK military base in Cyprus. The MOD says this ship is capable of protecting an area 5 times the size of Cyprus, but there has been criticism of the time taken to deploy this warship, and we're expecting it to arrive around this weekend, so quite a while it's going to take to get there.
Okay, so the Brits are on the way. Some would say, you know, they took a bit long to join the party. But tell us about the other countries that have moved these naval forces into the Med then, and where are those ships now operating specifically?
Yes, so as you mentioned, we're seeing a fairly significant buildup of naval assets in the eastern Mediterranean, and several countries are positioning forces closer to the Israel, Lebanon, Syria corridor. Now, these moves are largely precautionary, but they do reflect real concern among governments that the conflict could widen. The United States, unsurprisingly, has been the most visible in terms of their military positioning. So Washington actually already had a strong presence in the region, like I say, unlike the UK that actually didn't have anything in the Mediterranean. And in recent days, the US have been reinforcing that by deploying carrier strike groups and additional escort ships into the eastern Mediterranean. And those vessels are typically operating in international waters off the coast of Israel and Lebanon. And the main purpose is deterrence, essentially signaling to Iran and those allied proxies around the region, such as Hezbollah, that the US is ready to respond if the conflict escalates further. At the same time, these ships do provide air defense capabilities and could support evacuation operations or humanitarian missions if it does come to that. In several European countries, as we've been seeing, as our correspondent mentioned, have also either moved naval vessels closer to the area or placed them on standby. So France has long maintained a naval presence in the Mediterranean, and they've reinforced their patrols, partly because of that historic role and interest in Lebanon, which we discussed previously. Yeah. And similarly, as we've seen, the United Kingdom have just dispatched Royal Navy towards the region. There's 2 military bases in Cyprus that the UK has, and Some NATO ships in the area are supporting existing maritime missions, while others are simply maintaining a stronger presence as those tensions rise. And most of these vessels are operating in international waters in the Eastern Mediterranean, not in territorial waters. And that's significant here, as it allows them to respond quickly if they need, but it avoids direct involvement in the fighting. So it's a picture of strategic positioning, I would say, rather than active combat operations. And this is intended more as a deterrent to deter escalation and reassure allies in the region as well, which we've seen is very important with that case in Cyprus.
And Katie, you mentioned the word carriers there, aircraft carriers. Of course, there are many different types of vessel, destroyers, submarines. Just give us a sense of the different types of ship that are going to be coming into this region.
Yeah, so when we refer to carriers, we're normally talking about a mix of different warships, and modern naval operations are built around layered capabilities, sort of all supporting each other to fulfill every goal here. And the centerpiece in many cases is an aircraft carrier, particularly when we're talking about US Navy deployments. And that essentially functions as a floating airbase. It can launch fighter jets, surveillance aircraft and helicopters, and give commanders the ability to project air power without relying on land bases nearby. And in a crisis like this, those aircraft could carry out air defense missions, intelligence gathering, or if the situation were to escalate, strike operations. But just as importantly, a carrier presence sends a very strong political and military signal of deterrence. So it's as much about that as it is that readiness for this to potentially escalate. And you'll often see frigates, as Anita mentioned, deployed by European navies, such as those from France, the UK or Italy, and they tend to specialise in anti-submarine warfare or escort duties or maritime surveillance. And that helps monitor these key sea lanes, track submarines or other vessels, and contribute to that overall defensive shield. So yeah, we're seeing a range here of deployments and shipments, but when you put it all together, you've essentially got this layered naval force designed for deterrence, surveillance, and a rapid response. So with European governments deploying these vessels, it will allow them to react quickly if the situation were to deteriorate, but equally, hopefully, this will serve as a deterrence to prevent that.
Okay, deterrence, surveillance, and rapid response. So those are the sort of umbrella terms that all of this activity is going to sort of fit within. What are the governments saying about the reasons why? Are they going any deeper, giving us any more details?
Well, they've been very careful to frame this as precautionary and defensive rather than preparing for direct combat, and their language has been very deliberate, and that's the reason why they focus so much on deterrence, protection and contingency plannings, because the governments say the presence of their warship is meant to send a signal that they're ready to defend their interests and the partners if the conflict widens. French President Emmanuel Macron, so he described the French deployments as aimed at ensuring maritime security and helping prevent the situation from spiralling further. However, they have made it clear that this isn't just a deterrent, it is about protecting allies and military facilities. So a key ally in this region is, of course, Cyprus, not a NATO member but an EU country that hosts important Western bases and sits very close to the current crisis zone. And, you know, we're seeing that the HMS Dragon has left now, but there has been questions about whether the UK could have acted sooner in sending its warship and how prepared the UK were for this, and why wasn't this ship in the region already, is what a lot of people have also been asking. The Cypriot High Commissioner said he was disappointed by the UK's response after the base in Cyprus was hit last week. And another aspect of this that are going to be on the European government's minds is protecting shipping and trade routes. Leaders have warned that instability in the region could threaten critical maritime corridors linking Europe to the Middle East and Asia. And these deployments, they are about preparedness rather than escalation, and defence ministries say by moving ships into the region, it gives them options, whether that's monitoring the situation, defending bases, protecting shipments, or even helping civilians if they need to be evacuated from this region. But as these ships are in international waters, it doesn't commit them to any immediate military action.
And Katie, what is it about the Eastern Mediterranean that makes it so strategic, so delicate, so important?
So it's essentially sitting at the intersection of several flashpoints, and it's one of the closest international waters to this conflict unfolding in the Middle East. So when navies are moving their ships there, they're positioning themselves within relatively quick reach of places like Israel, Lebanon and Syria, while still remaining in international waters. So from there, the navies can monitor developments along the Israeli and Lebanese coasts, also keep an eye on activity in Syria, but remain within operational distance of key regional actors. And it is also close to Western military facilities like Cyprus, which hosts important bases used by European and Allied forces. So it makes it a logical hub for surveillance, logistics, coordination, and it's also an important area for global trade and energy flows. So tankers and cargo vessels regularly pass through this route on routes linking Europe with the Middle East and Asia. So if tensions were to escalate, there are concerns that those shipping lanes could be disrupted, which is one reason the government are sending their naval assets nearby to monitor that situation and ensure freedom of navigation. And of course, as we mentioned, there is that political signalling aspect. By deploying ships to the Eastern Mediterranean, it allows governments to demonstrate support for allies, which is important, and also deterrent towards their adversaries without directly placing forces in contested waters. So visible enough to send a message, but still measured enough to avoid an immediate escalation.
So finally, Katie, what's been confirmed so far? Because we've got a lot of governments involved, and also what should our viewers be looking out for? The Brits are going to be on the way, hopefully by the weekend. What else should we be looking out for?
Yeah, so definitely follow HMS Dragon in its journey to Cyprus. Several media outlets are providing live updates of that. As I say, it's expected to be there by the weekend, so let's see if that happens. I'm sure the government would have questions to answer if there was any delays to that. There's already questions about why it's taken so long to even get to the area. So definitely that's one to keep an eye on. And of course, this growing naval presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. So several countries have confirmed they're going to be sending ships. Italy, Spain, France and the Netherlands, they're all deploying naval vessels as part of a coordinated effort to reinforce security around Cyprus, which has become that key hub of Western military activities. And I think it's that steady stream that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. So the Netherlands, they confirmed they were going to be sending a frigate to the Mediterranean to help protect Cyprus after a request from France. So it's showing how closely these European responses are being coordinated. So that's, I think, an interesting aspect here. So we'll see how that develops. And of course, this comes after a drone strike that hit the British air base in Cyprus earlier this month, which has raised concerns that this wider regional conflict could spill closer to Europe's borders. So this is as much as a show of support from Europe to Cyprus that is a member of the EU. So I think another key thing will be whether in the coming days these deployments remain precautionary, whether we still hear that language, or whether further escalation in the region might mean that these forces will have to take on a more active role.
Yeah, of course. Very interesting indeed. Katie, thanks as always. Great to have your analysis. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at rising tensions as Israel reports new casualties from missile attacks, while Lebanon calls for a ceasefire and direct negotiations. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabon. One important note. To fear. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kiev, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port Emu.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. A report by the Financial Times suggests Israel could be preparing to expand its offensive in Lebanon. The development comes as US-Israel war with Iran moves into its second week, raising concerns the conflict could spread further across the region.
As the world focuses on the US-Israel war with Iran, which has brought instability to the Middle East, another conflict in the region is unfolding simultaneously and could outlast the fighting with Tehran. A report by the Financial Times says Israel is preparing to expand its ongoing campaign in Lebanon against the militant group Hezbollah, citing sources familiar with the discussions. Israel's latest offensive against the Iran-backed group began after Hezbollah fired rockets into northern Israel in retaliation for the assassination of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei. Israel had previously launched a full-scale offensive in Lebanon in October 2024, leading to a year of cross-border fighting between the two sides. The clashes began when Hezbollah fired rockets into Israel following Hamas's October 2023 attack from Gaza. A US-brokered ceasefire formally ended the fighting, but Israel continued near-daily strikes. According to a source cited by the Financial Times, the goal of Israel's current campaign in Lebanon is to inflict enough damage on Hezbollah to deter future confrontations. Since the latest escalation, Israeli forces have struck more than 600 sites across Lebanon, with most attacks targeting the country's south and Beirut's densely populated southern suburbs, where Hezbollah has a strong presence. The Israeli military has also deployed forces inside Lebanese territory at least 12 outposts along the narrow frontier. Officials say the move is defensive and intended to preempt potential Hezbollah attacks. Sources also suggest Israeli troops could be sent to the Bekaa Valley, parts of which are considered a Hezbollah stronghold. Although the Lebanese government condemned Hezbollah's initial actions and banned its military activity following the escalation, Israeli officials have signalled they remain committed to their objectives.
Israel says its campaign against Iranian-backed forces could be far from over. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has suggested the conflict may continue for some time, even as missile attacks, new casualties and regional tensions keep the situation on edge. A News correspondent Maria Rodriguez Abalde reports now from North Tel Aviv.
Netanyahu contradicts Trump regarding his statement that the war is about to end. He comments that there is still a lot left to be done. End of Iranian regime, he say, depends on Iranian people's will to throw off the yoke of tyranny. Israel is preparing for a long campaign against Hezbollah, one that is expected to last longer than the current operation against Iran. The IDF launched a wave of strikes against Hezbollah infrastructure in Beirut's southern suburbs this afternoon after repeated warning to evacuate it. At least 1 million people were displaced already in Lebanon. Also, a second victim was reported in yesterday's strike in Israel. The two men were working on a construction site when one of the cluster bomb munitions from the ballistic missile struck the area. They were not in a bomb shelter or other protective space, according to first responders. 2,300 Israelis have been transported to hospitals since the beginning of this war, 99 of whom are still receiving treatment. During the morning, the sirens were activated twice here in Tel Aviv. The government is reportedly considering closing the airspace again. Yesterday, a plane attempting to land in the country had to quickly turn around due to the threat of a missile.
Well, to help us understand the latest developments and what they could mean for the region, I'm joined now by regional analyst Kian Rubey, joining us from London in the UK. Kian, thank you very much indeed for joining us on PrimeTime. Good to see you there. Let's look at where things stand right now then. Israel expanding operations. How would you describe the current phase of this conflict?
To be honest, the hottest it has ever been. We have never seen anything like this between Israel and the Iranian proxies. Right now, Israel is expanding ground operations and operations into Lebanon, as you mentioned, and there is a risk of it even going further than that. Obviously, the Iranians are ideologically aligned with Hezbollah, and they're willing to fight till the end, and that means, even if that means the destruction of Lebanon and Iran. So we're in a really hot time at the moment in the Middle East, and there's no saying which direction it could go.
And on the Iranian side, they've been warning about the strength of their capabilities, maybe hinting that some capabilities that haven't yet been deployed. How much of that do you think is signalling, and how much of it reflects the reality on the ground?
To answer this question, I think to understand that the IRGC, the Islamic Republic in Iran, gives their propaganda machine, the propaganda machine is designed for three separate audiences. One is for their external enemies, that being Israel and the United States. The other being their internal enemies, that being regular Iranians that could be opposed to the regime. And then the third, which is their domestic support. These are three different audiences expecting to hear different things from the Iranian regime. Their supporters obviously want to hear things that give them reassurance for their support. For example, they want to hear that America is losing, that Iran will be able to win this war, that the IRGC will be able to win this war. All at the same time, they do want to project an image of strength to their enemies. How much of that is true is obviously up for debate. In my personal opinion, there is a lot of virtue signaling. At the moment, the IRGC is in the worst situation it has been in the last 47 years. Their entire leadership is effectively eliminated. Their most influential spiritual guide, Ali Khamenei, was killed on the first day of the war, especially after talking for almost 47 years, saying death to America, death to the West, etc. He was eliminated on the first day. So the IRGC is in a very vulnerable position right now. Their leadership is trying to recalibrate, trying to readjust, seeing which direction this could go. So I think a lot of a lot of the propaganda that is coming out right now could be just to reassure that support base that they do have in Iran, just by either overestimating their power or overestimating their ambitions even.
And for Israel, obviously they're fighting on multiple fronts already. They're fighting against Iran. They're also fighting to the north against Hezbollah. Is there any danger that you think that this sort of fighting on multiple fronts could lead to new fronts, new groups kind of opening up?
That's the tricky part about the Middle East, is that every border is basically a front. Right now, you could say that the last 20 or so years has been a Cold War between the Islamic Republic and Israel that has sort of become hot at certain moments. Now it's at its hottest. And the thing is, we have to also consider that Hezbollah is just a proxy in Lebanon. There's proxies in Palestine, there's proxies in Syria, there's proxies even in Iraq. And they're already actually kind of involved, you know? There's Iraqi militias firing at American bases in Iraq. Last night, there were several reports that Hezbollah fired into Syria based on the fact that Israel was firing from Syria. So it's already expanding. That risk is there. It's very much so that at any point, any other group, whether that be the Houthis in Yemen or a militia in Iraq, they could join the fighting at any point. And that's not necessarily to say that one specific dramatic event might lead to them joining the fight. It could just be a series of things or a series of escalatory events that leads to either Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, or let's say even the Houthis or any of these other groups getting involved.
And what is the attitude of the Israeli government towards the Lebanese government at this point? I believe the Lebanese government have called for a ceasefire, pushing for negotiations. I know there have been very difficult relations in the past, but there has, I think, been some improvement, or at least perception of improvement when it comes to the Lebanese government dealing with groups like Hezbollah. What's the current sensibility in Israel about the Lebanese government?
I think there's a lot of confusion surrounding the Lebanese government. Obviously, they themselves have been victims to what Hezbollah has done in Lebanon and the destruction that Hezbollah has done in Lebanon. So with that being said, I guess the viewpoint from the Israeli government is that the Lebanese government should step up and the Lebanese military should effectively eliminate Hezbollah or help Israel to disarm Hezbollah. But I also think right now, at this moment in time, the Lebanese government are in a position of weakness in the sense that Hezbollah is basically, the consequences of Hezbollah's actions are going to be seen by all of Lebanon and the Lebanese state. And I think Israel knows this. And they're willing to use that to their advantage to get what they want, which is to eliminate Hezbollah. So does that mean they put pressure in certain diplomatic ways on the Lebanese government to encourage them to aid in the dismantling of Hezbollah? Could be. Does it mean that maybe they put military pressure so that the Lebanese army gets involved on the side of Israel? That could also be possible. But this is a very tense topic because as much as, let's say, Lebanese people could be against Hezbollah for what Hezbollah has done to their country, I think there's an overarching sentiment of anti-Israel amongst the Lebanese population. There might be a minority that don't mind to negotiate peace or have terms with Israel. But I would say the overwhelming majority, even if they are against Hezbollah, still has that hatred towards Israel. And Israel knows this too. So I think all of these factors will play into what the Israeli government does with the Lebanese government, and also what the Lebanese government will try to push for.
So many sensitive areas, Kian. I mean, what do you think our viewers should be watching out for over the coming days and weeks? Indicators that will tell us whether things are going to sort of increase or whether actually there's a chance that things will calm down?
I would say the most important thing is to watch the scale and frequency of missile and drone exchanges. Obviously, at the beginning, we're probably going to have a higher volume. Certain reports even show that Iranian IRGC missiles being sent to GCC countries have actually decreased, and even the missiles being sent to Israel have also decreased. So there's a couple of things. It could be that. It could also be the involvement of other actors. Let's say now, yesterday, the Syrian army were reported being under attack from Hezbollah. So if they get involved now, that's a whole other army that went through an entire civil war now being involved in this conflict. Another particular focal point that I would focus on is the attacks on energy infrastructure. The Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic, wants the region to know that they're going to tear the region down if it means that they will go down. They're willing to take the region down with them. That being said, that's why they're targeting, let's say, infrastructure, energy infrastructure, oil infrastructure, pipelines in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, because they know that this will push these Western allied Arab countries or American allied Arab countries to the brink, where they will question their relationship, or this is the idea of the Islamic Republic, is to make them question their relationship with the United States. All of these factors could then make Washington up their involvement in this conflict. All of these, and then obviously we have the whole back channel, what's going on behind the scenes that we as a public don't see. All of these things together are things to be aware of, especially over the next few days to few weeks, because I would personally say that within the next 1 week, we're going to find out how long this is going to last, whether it is a several-week campaign or whether it's even longer than that. But I would say the main thing is focusing on those missile and drone exchanges and the frequency of those exchanges, as well as the specific targeting of energy infrastructure by the Islamic Republic.
Kian, thank you very much for your insight. We appreciate it very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be on.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Do stay with us.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back to Primetime. Now let's check in with those correspondents around the world. The European Union says Georgia's Kulevi oil terminal will be excluded from its latest sanctions package against Russia. EU officials say assurances that sanctioned vessels will not use the terminal helped address concerns about oil transport and compliance. A News' correspondent has more now from Tbilisi.
The European Union has decided not to include Georgia's Kulevi oil terminal in its upcoming 20th sanctions package against Russia, a move that changes the picture around an issue that had drawn growing attention across the region. According to a letter sent by EU Special Representative for Sanctions, David O'Sullivan, to Georgia's Foreign Minister Mak Abochorishvili, the port had initially been considered for sanctions because of concerns related to the transport of Russian oil and the possible presence of vessels linked to Russia's so-called shadow fleet. These ships are often used to move oil while avoiding Western restrictions. However, the EU says the situation was reassessed after commitments from the Georgian government and the port operator. Tbilisi assured Brussels that vessels already sanctioned by the EU would not be allowed to enter Georgian ports or receive services there. At the same time, the operator of the Kulevi terminal, Azerbaijan state energy company SOCAR, also reinforced its commitment to follow all relevant EU sanctions. including the price cap on Russian crude oil and restrictions on petroleum products derived from Russian oil. EU officials say these assurances were a key factor behind the decision to exclude the port from the sanctions package. The case has drawn attention partly because of Olevi's strategic role in regional logistics. Located on Georgia's Black Sea coast, the terminal is part of the broader transport network connecting the Caspian region with European markets. This route, often referred to as the Middle Corridor, links Central Asia and the South Caucasus with Europe through a combination of rail, road, and maritime connections. The EU says that it is continuing its broader effort to limit Russian oil exports and prevent sanctions evasion. More than 600 vessels are already under EU restrictions for involvement in high-risk shipping practices, and around 40 additional ships are expected to be added in the next sanctions package. In Tbilisi, representatives of the ruling Georgian Dream Party said that the EU decision confirms Georgia has been complying with sanctions and cooperating with international partners. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Azerbaijan continues to play a key role as a transit route for people leaving Iran, with diplomats and foreign nationals among those crossing into the country. A News' correspondent Chimnaz Shalar has more now from Astara.
Evacuations from Iran through the Astara state border checkpoint are continuing. So far, more than 2,000 people have been evacuated from Iran to Azerbaijan. The number includes more than 300 citizens of Azerbaijan. Diplomatic missions are also using the Astara checkpoint. Most recently, Mexico's ambassador to Iran, along with several Mexican diplomats and their family members, were evacuated through this border crossing. The ambassador said Mexico's embassy in Iran will temporarily continue its work from Baku and described Azerbaijan as a friendly country with strong bilateral relations.
Mexico and Azerbaijan, we have very good bilateral relationship. I actually come often to Azerbaijan. This is one of the many times I have come from Iran as posted as ambassador of Mexico there. But this time I came, as I told you, to continue working with my team, along with my team from Baku, to continue to assist the Mexican community in Iran. And hopefully all these things that we are watching currently, they will finish soon and through a peaceful solution.
Meanwhile, humanitarian aid has been sent to Iran on the instruction of the president of Azerbaijan. The convoy is expected to pass through the Astara border crossing. That's why we remain here in Astara, continuing to follow the process. Chimnaz Shahlar with Nijat Kasimov, A News.
One more repatriation flight carrying around 200 Azerbaijani citizens touched down at Heydar Aliyev International Airport on Tuesday. The Azerbaijan Airlines aircraft arrived from Muscat as part of ongoing efforts to bring citizens home amid the conflict in the Middle East. A News correspondent Rakaya Bashamak has the details.
We are here at Heydar Aliyev International Airport, where another repatriation flight has just landed, bringing home Azerbaijani citizens from the Middle East. The flight arrived from Muscat, the capital of Oman, to Baku and was operated by the country's national carrier, Azerbaijan Airlines. Officials say around 200 Azerbaijani citizens were on board, many of whom had been staying in the region, including the United Arab Emirates, and have now returned home due to the recent developments in the Middle East.
I'm a student of Wollongong, the university in Dubai. The war was actually not that chaotic. Luckily, UAE is really good at intercepting the drones, but I'm really grateful for our Azerbaijani government that gave us, a gesture of help by taking us back to Azerbaijan. The flight was smooth, everything else was amazing. I want to express my gratitude toward our president, Ilham Aliyev, and the consulate, the General of Consulate of Azerbaijan, which have done an amazing job.
We have arrived from Abu Dhabi. First of all, we would like to express our gratitude to President Ilham Aliyev, as well as to the embassy in Abu Dhabi, the consulate in Dubai, and Azerbaijan Airlines. Everyone who worked hard to organize this did it at a very high level. Everything was very well organized. I worked there, I came with my mother and brought her with me. There are really no words. We hope there will always be unity and that everything continues to be organized quickly and efficiently.
The aircraft operating the route is a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and authorities say the repatriation process was carried out in a safe and organized way. This is considered a part of the ongoing efforts to help Azerbaijani citizens who were abroad in the region return safely to the country. This is Ruqayya Bashamakh in Baku from A News.
The United States says international aid to Afghanistan should be reassessed as the country faces a worsening humanitarian crisis. At the UN Security Council, Washington pointed to Taliban restrictions, particularly on women, as a key concern. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis reports now from Kabul.
The United States says international assistance to Afghanistan needs closer evaluation, citing the Taliban's continued restriction on women and limited cooperation with the international community. Addressing the UN Security Council, US Ambassador Mike Waltz said the world must consider how effective its engagement is, particularly when female Afghan staff working for the United Nations are not even allowed to go into the office. Waltz also highlighted the scale of the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan, which has the largest budget of any special UN mission, with its mandate up for renewal next week. At the same time, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan remains severe. The UN World Food Programme says more than 17 million people, around one-third of the population, are facing acute food shortages, including nearly 5 million experiencing emergency levels of hunger. UN officials warn the crisis is worsening as funding falls short. Humanitarian agencies hope to assist 17.5 million Afghans next year through a $1.7 billion appeal. But so far, only about 10% of that funding has been secured. They also caution that ongoing regional tensions and rising prices are adding pressure. And without progress on rights and humanitarian issues, Afghanistan could again become a source of broader instability. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan are expanding cooperation on managing shared rivers and reservoirs. Officials say the two countries are coordinating water distribution and irrigation planning through joint mechanisms aimed at improving efficiency and regional water management. A News' Seville Rajapova picked up the story.
Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan are expanding cooperation on managing shared rivers and reservoirs, according to Uzbekistan's ambassador to Kyrgyzstan, Said Akram Niyaz-Hojayev. Coordination between the two countries takes place through intergovernmental mechanisms, including regular meetings of a joint commission on water management. The sides work together on distributing water resources from transboundary rivers, preparing for the agricultural irrigation season, and improving the efficiency of water use. Water resources in Central Asia are mainly formed upstream. Along 43% of the region's river flow originates in Tajikistan and about 25% in Kyrgyzstan, while downstream countries, including Uzbekistan, depend heavily on these flows for agriculture and energy. The region's two main rivers, the Amu Darya and Sri Darya, together provide roughly 116 billion cubic meters of water annually. Uzbekistan uses about 51 billion cubic meters of water per year, and nearly 80% of this comes from transboundary sources, making regional cooperation essential. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan also coordinate reservoir operations and major hydropower initiatives, including the Kambora Ta-1 hydropower plant. The ambassador noted that Uzbekistan is also investing heavily in water efficiency. Between 2020 and 2024, the country allocated more than $4.8 billion in state funds, along with $622 million in foreign investment, to introduce water-saving technologies. These systems now cover about 2.6 million hectares, roughly 60% of irrigated land, saving around 2.5 billion cubic meters of water annually. Niaz Khajayev added that Uzbekistan is also modernizing its water management systems, expanding digital monitoring of irrigation infrastructure, and planning further reforms under a national program for water resource management, running until 2028. It is Sividvar Javvoy from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, News.
Reports circulating on social media about so-called acid clouds moving from Iran towards Central Asia have raised concerns online. Now, the claims suggest pollutants from strikes on Iran's oil facilities could spread across the region. A News' Fariza Kalamazina in Almaty, Kazakhstan has the details.
Reports about so-called acid clouds allegedly moving from Iran toward Central Asia are not supported by scientific data. National hydrometeorological services in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan say there is no risk to the region. In recent days, claims about a possible environmental danger have spread widely on social media and messaging platforms, raising concern among users. Posts suggested that following strikes on Iran's oil infrastructure, large amounts of harmful substances had been released into the atmosphere, potentially forming dangerous air masses capable of traveling long distances. However, specialists say these claims have no scientific basis. According to Kazakhstan's National Hydrometeorological Service, acid precipitation forms from sulfur and nitrogen oxides, typically released by industrial activity, energy production and transport, usually near the source of emissions. Experts explain that when air masses travel long distances, the concentration of these substances drops significantly due to natural atmospheric processes such as dilution and chemical reactions. Monitoring data show no signs of these pollutants moving toward Kazakhstan or other countries in Central Asia. Specialists are urging the public to rely on information from official meteorological and environmental services and to treat unverified claims circulating online with caution. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
The UK government is warning the war involving Iran could soon have economic consequences for British households. Well, Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the longer the conflict continues, the more likely it is to affect the UK economy. A News' correspondent reports now from the UK.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has warned that the longer the conflict involving Iran, the United States and Israel continues, the more likely it is to affect the UK economy and household finances. Speaking at a community centre in London on Monday, Starmer said the government is assessing risks and working with international partners to reduce the potential economic impact on people and businesses in the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister warned that while the British economy is currently more resilient than it was during the 2022 energy crisis triggered by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the government must remain prepared. He said if the conflict continues to escalate, it could ultimately affect the lives and households of everybody and every business in the United Kingdom. Energy prices remain a major concern. Global oil prices have surged amid fears the conflict will disrupt supplies from the Middle East. Oil briefly climbed above $100 per barrel for the first time since 2022, raising concerns about rising fuel and energy costs. However, prices later retreated, falling below $90 per barrel after US President Donald Trump said the war with Iran was very complete, pretty much, and after G7 countries signaled they could release strategic oil reserves to help offset supply disruptions. The issue was discussed during a meeting of G7 finance ministers, where countries examined ways to stabilize energy markets and support global energy supply. Following the meeting, Chancellor Rachel Reeves warned that the increase in energy prices could push inflation higher in the coming months. She also said Britain is ready to support a coordinated release of emergency oil reserves from the International Energy Agency if necessary to help stabilize markets. Trina Persada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
And finally tonight, as Azerbaijan marks Wind Tuesday, the third of the 4 Tuesdays leading to Nowruz, tradition turns to the invisible force that stirs the earth and signals winter is beginning to loosen its grip. It's a moment that reminds many here that change is already moving through the season, quietly carrying spring ever closer. Well, that is Prime Time. Good night.